The Jesse Blake Sports Report with Jesse Blake.
Let's start with new news from Bob Nightingale of USA Today about the trade deadline and the Blue Jays' future. He writes in his Sunday column that GMs are openly wondering whether this could be a rather dull trade deadline. There could be plenty of names, but not a real impact player on this year's playoff races now that the New York Mets, Chicago Cubs, and Texas Rangers are suddenly playing better baseball and may not sell. The free-falling Blue Jays will soon start their fire sale while keeping Bichette and Guerrero. Rival GMs say the only player who will bring a significant return is starter Yusei Kikuchi. The Blue Jays' bright future suddenly looks quite murky. The Chicago Cubs have expressed interest in Blue Jays catcher Danny Jansen. And last note from Bob, baseball executives are starting to believe that Blue Jays GM Ross Atkins, the Padres GM, and the Giants president of baseball operations all may have to make the playoffs to assure they keep their jobs. Atkins appears to be in the most danger. Let's start from the end and work our way back, because what the hell are they talking about making the playoffs? Does Rogers not look at the standings or even this Jays team for like one inning and realize that playoffs aren't in the realm of possibility for this team? Just a quick peek at the standing. The Jays right now are 43 and 52. Going into today, the Blue Jays are 43 and 52, 14 and a half games back of the first place Baltimore Orioles in the American League East. And then the wild card race, they are 10 games back of the third wild card spot at 43 and 52. And they just closed out their victory against the Arizona Diamondbacks on Sunday, their last game before the All-Star break. So they are 44 and 52, but like that 10 games back gets them to like 9.5, depending on how the Red Sox go here to close out before the All-Star break. So like at best, they're 9 games back of the wild card spot, and just how they are playing. The idea that this team makes the playoffs is so absurd and ridiculous and out of touch with how the ball club is playing and how the guys on the team are playing and how everything looks from here to the rest of the season. So the idea that Ross Atkins gets the luxury of sitting in the GM seat for the rest of the year and seeing how it all unfolds and if they make the playoffs or not is ridiculous. It's ridiculous because it should be a write-off right now. You need to be realistic about the ball club and look towards next season. That's where your focus should be if you are Blue Jays management. How do we make this team a competitive team in 2025? Because the window with these guys, with these kids, was the last couple of years. 22, 23, and 24 were huge years for this Blue Jays squad, having Bichette and Guerrero controlled and under reasonable contracts. They went for it. They spent a bunch of money, and they spent it in the wrong ways and on the wrong players and in the wrong trades and everything in between. This was the window for the Jays, so they need to extend this window as long as possible because they have not won anything yet. So in these 9 years that Ross Atkins has been here, the goal has been to win a World Series, put a competitive team on the field, a team that is challenging for a World Series in and year out. And he has not done that. He has had countless opportunities, 9 years of opportunities to do that, and he has failed. And if his seat is dependent on this year, them making the playoffs, then his seat is no longer there. It is gone. And that is why right now, at the All-Star break, right before the biggest sell-off of this Blue Jays team's history of the last 2 decades, at least, he shouldn't be in control of that. If Ross Atkins' job depends on this team making a playoffs, his job should already be over. And if that is the case, he should not be the one in charge of performing this sell-off. And let's go back to the notes that Bob Nightingale had there. Danny Jansen to the Cubs. That's a real possibility. That's something they have to do to recoup assets on Danny Jansen. Yusei Kikuchi is the prime asset at the trade deadline here. The Blue Jays have the blue chip. They have a case of water in a drought. They need to get as much as possible for Kikuchi because They're obviously don't need him for the rest of the year because they're not going to win games. And then if they want him for next year, they could always re-sign him as a free agent in the offseason. And it doesn't look like he's probably going to come back anyway. So because somebody's going to give him a giant deal in free agency. So he's gone. Get some assets for him while you can. So they have the prime asset that people are looking for. Starting pitching, a great starting pitcher. Get something for him. A premium. Their price better be a premium. And there's no reason to trust Ross Atkins with making these deals in the next couple of weeks when they have an option. They have a perfect option within the organization to hand over the keys for the rest of the year and just see how he does. His name is James Click. He's the vice president of baseball strategy. And if that job sounds very esoteric and doesn't really mean anything, that's because that's what his job is within the Blue Jays. James Click is kind of just like, hey, I'm just going to see how like baseball works within our organization and like, where should we go in the future? I'm just going to sit and ponder things. And, I don't really have a day-to-day job. It's just kind of like think about baseball and look at stats and see how things are going. That's what James Click was brought in to do. And if you don't know James Click, he was the former general manager of the Houston Astros. He was the GM there for 3 seasons after coming over for the Tampa Bay Rays. And his background is in data. Like, he's a baseball nerd to the T, and that's the coolest thing ever. He was a coder way back when, and that's how he got started in baseball. He worked for the Rays for a while, and then he got the GM job in Houston. In 2020, he's the GM of the Houston Astros, and in 2021 and 22, the Houston Astros go to the American League Championship Series and then lose, and then in 21, they go to the World Series and then lose, and then 22, they win the World Series! So the Blue Jays hired the guy who went to 3 straight American League Championship Series, one World Series loss in 21, and then they were the World Series champions in 2022. And after the World Series in 22, the Houston Astros and James Click, they went through contract negotiations because his contract was up, and the offer that they gave him, they lowballed him. They offered him like a 1-year deal that was like not a lot of money and all this stuff. And James said, no, I don't want this. We're going to mutually part ways, and I'm going to go my separate way and look for something else in baseball. So then that February of 2023, the Blue Jays scooped him up. The Blue Jays scooped up the World Series winning GM from the 2022 season and brought him to the front office, and they said, James, you can have this esoteric job where you are vice president of baseball strategy, and you just get to walk around the office to every department and say, you know what? Let's just think about baseball and how this organization is going to do and be in 10 and 5 years down the road. And what do we think about how we build this team and this whole thing we got going here in Toronto? And ever since the February of 23, and so for about a year and a half now, James has been in the organization, has been learning it and just kind of meandering from department to department, doing his own thing. And he's been learning about the Blue Jays and baseball. And the Blue Jays have had this guy in their organization, so he knows it. And Ross Atkins has been the general manager handling the day-to-day tasks, and he has failed. There's no other way to put it. Ross Atkins has failed at his job to put a winning, competitive team on the field year in and year out during this window where they are supposed to be really good. He has failed to put a winner on the field. He should not be the overseeing manager of their biggest trade deadline in this Blue Jays era. Let's give the job to a different person, somebody within the organization, James Click, who has different ideas because he is not Ross Atkins. He is a different human, and he has a history of being a very successful general manager. Almost a perfect resume in 3 years as the Houston Astros general manager. Let's go over it again. A World Series win, a World Series loss, and an AL Championship Series loss. All he's done is been really successful while inheriting a really good team. He got them to the promised land as tasked. I would love to see Mark Shapiro fire Ross Atkins now that we are at the All-Star break. There's a little lull here in the schedule where you can make the changeover. The media is like gone on vacay in every sport. It won't be that much of a media storm. It's a good changeover at this point. The players are away having their little vacays if they're not at the All-Star game. Make the change right now. Have James Click come in and oversee the sell-off. oversee the retool. Have this as like the trial period. Have him as interim general manager. Don't give him the full title if you don't want, but at least let's move forward with this team and see something new, because what we have isn't working. And if Ross Atkins is just going to be fired at the end of this season anyways, he shouldn't be the one to oversee the creation of the 2025 team, because the trade deadline in 24 should be for the creation of the 25 team. And if he's not going to be here in 25, then he shouldn't be in charge. James Click will be here in 25, and he's a great mind and has the right talent and background to be a general manager. He has done it before. Let him do this. And that's why I think it's a perfect time to fire Ross Atkins. If you enjoyed this, give it a like on YouTube. Give it a like on your favorite podcast app. Hit subscribe on the Jesse Blake Sports Report YouTube channel. Let me know your thoughts on the 2024 Toronto Blue Jays and the upcoming trade deadline. Stay tuned for plenty more coverage on how the trade deadline unfolds in Toronto. I will see you again here very shortly. Good night.
And that is how it's done.
The Jesse Blake Sports Report with Jesse Blake.
Jesse Blake, the guy that likes to hear his name twice in one sentence. Sure, I know him. No, he doesn't have an ego at all.